the pivot out of academia is a process.
I
I
agree.
don't know if I've ever met anybody who was like, yeah, and I was okay and I moved on and now life is great. Like, no, we're all we're all still in mourning, I think, in some way, shape, or forms.
Hi, it's Ryan. After Your PhD has been around since 2021, offering free support for PhDs and academics with questions about life beyond academia through the blog, resource list, newsletter, and this podcast. If this work has helped you in any way, consider joining the community supporter tier on Patreon for just $5 a month. Support the website, newsletter, and podcast, and get a shout out at the end of each episode. You can become a paid member by visiting patreon.com/afteryourphd. Thanks for listening. In today's podcast, I'll be speaking with Caroline Malloy, who earned her PhD in history. She decided to walk away from the academic grind as an adjunct, and she decided to find another job and a new career path. And she ended up finding herself doing lectures on cruise ships and helping travelers with their own book manuscripts, and eventually building a book coaching business for women writing nonfiction. So firstly, I just wanted to let you introduce yourself. I think I missed an introduction. I think that'd be great for the audience.
Yeah, no, it's nice to join you, Ryan. The
Mhm.
introduction was great. I worked for years on my PhD, my master's in history. My PhD was actually in art history, and that's its own interesting saga. But then I taught history for several years as an adjunct before pivoting out.
Yeah, and so when you're finishing your PhD, kind of near the end of it, what did you imagine your career would look like? Like, did you have like this dream job in mind? Like, was it being a professor or something else?
Oh yeah, no, I was professor all the way. Like my
Mm.
dream, my husband jokes that like I was the only person he knew who never planned on retiring. I wanted to be like 90 years old in some adorable little college town, like sitting, like, I had the whole dream. Absolutely 100%. I was a high school teacher before I went to grad school. And so
Okay.
I loved students, I loved the classroom. Like I just knew that was a home for me, but I was a Latin teacher, so I wanted to do the history and the archaeology and get my hands dirty and less language and more bigger context. And that's why I went to grad school.
Yeah, yeah. I was my BA. Sorry, my BA was in history actually too. So I do have a interest in history. I also was interested in like film history as well, but I think I eventually learned like that was even more competitive in terms of the academic field. So I kind of pivoted more to social science research when I was at IU. But yeah, history is definitely one of the more tougher academic like job markets, I would say. So I can see why those would pivot. And so you were talking about I mentioned adjuncting and kind of your experience with that, and that you took a sabbatical from it is kind of what you were telling me. And so what was this decision? Like, was there like a breaking point? Was it just was there just a lot of stress? Like again, maybe job market concerns? Kind of curious like that the eventual pivot from that.
Yeah, I mean, like so many of us, right? Like we all know the market's going to be
Mm,
bad, but then you're like, yeah, but I'll make it through, right? Like you have to have that sort of like willful ignorance of the reality at some point.
mm,
And so adjuncting was just the natural pivot. And then, right, the idea was go from adjuncting to maybe like, visiting positions for like a year here, a year there, and like build that somehow. But also, the idea that at least in history, after a couple years adjuncting, knowing that your value on the market goes down. So kind of threading that needle as I was on the job market and realizing there were very few jobs even to apply to every year. After 4 or 5 years, I guess, of adjuncting,
yeah,
decided
peace. Yeah, stuff.
decided to take a sabbatical, right? Which was the fancy
Mhm.
way of saying I can't go get paid almost nothing again this semester, but I don't have an out yet and I just have to stop. So it was really like the sabbatical was a fancy term for stopping the merry-go-round. And figuring out like, I couldn't figure out something else to do while I was still teaching because even as an adjunct, there was something about like being in the classroom still fed the hope that somehow miraculously something would magically happen and I would be a professor, right? Like, so I had to step away and like cut it off. Um, and that was the fall semester, some years ago now. Just decided not to go back and, fortunately had a spouse who is not an academic, which allowed me some flexibility. So I had some savings and I had some support to be able to say, all right, what the hell am I going to do next?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of maybe academics that are very also like grateful to have a partner that isn't in academia. And I think it also helps like if you're venting a lot. Just from
Yes.
personally curious. But yeah, so in terms of that, the sabbatical, is that related anyway to like the cruise ship, kind of lecturing circuit that you're doing?
So there
I want to know kind of how that experience like started and yeah, your thoughts.
Yeah, no, they're coincidental. It really was right
Mhm.
place, right time. So my quote unquote sabbatical semester, um, I was so my PhD is in 19th and 20th century British Empire. And
Nice.
so all of my professional memberships were actually UK based. Um, so the sabbatical semester in, I can't remember, couldn't tell you now what journal it was, in the back of some academic, membership journal, like same place where you find like conference listings and, essays that they're looking for and all that sort of stuff. There was actually a listing for cruise ship lecturers, like amidst all of the other serious academic stuff. And I had a lot of free time on my hands. And so I submitted materials, and they were very clear at that point that they were like looking for, I think the company had this idea that there was a whole bunch of like tenured professors who were just like loaded with free time.
Interesting.
When in
So it's like
fact,
an open mic night essentially, but on a cruise
pretty
ship.
much. Yeah, like I
Huh.
think they were like, oh, everybody will love to do this, but people with jobs obviously don't have that kind of free time. So they wound up offering me a very last minute opportunity to go for a couple weeks to the Med. Despite, like I said, my background, my professional work is 19th, 20th century Britain. That Latin teacher background was in my back pocket from like a decade or so earlier, and they needed somebody to talk about ancient Rome. And so with like a week's notice, I wound up on a plane to Italy. And uh, kind of everything went from there. My colleagues are almost all retired professors. Everybody's like 70s and 80s and living out the good life. And there's a handful of us who are, adjuncts or younger professors or people like myself who pivoted out and have built this into what comes next. And I think it's a really good thing because my husband and I always joke that if you find yourself somewhere and everyone else there is a lot older and retired, they waited their whole life to be there and you got there before that. And I think there's something to that. And that's really how I see what I do now with the cruise ships, which is I don't have to wait till retirement to do the thing that my professorial colleagues all have to wait till retirement to do.
Yeah, and that's great to hear. And also based on like that those experiences you're talking about, it seems like it was a connecting experience. So it wasn't just lecturing on a cruise ship. You were also doing some like book reviewing and like manuscript reviewing. So like how did that come about? Like you were just kind of talking to people who are like at these lectures?
Yeah, so that's a whole different thing, right? So
Interesting.
in terms of like what do you do after the PhD and how do you pivot? I was now on a cruise ship
Hmm.
with this awesome opportunity where someone was giving me the chance to still do the travel and talk about the subjects I loved, with none of the pressure, but it meant that I needed to backfill the rest of my life and actually get like a steady, solid paycheck and build a business. And I played around with a couple things that didn't work. And what was happening is, and I think it was more of a trust building situation. On repeated cruises, I would have people come up to me with book manuscripts, which is also how I found out that septuagenarians and octogenarians travel with printed book manuscripts. It's a fascinating fun fact about retirees. And they would come up to me like over a glass of wine or a cup of coffee, and Ryan, like it happened repeatedly. People would drop a manuscript in front of me and go, "So I'm working on this book. I loved your talk on, Augustus, but this is my mystery novel. Can you read it and give me your feedback? Because I think you're the person like who could really give me some good feedback." And I would be like, "This is a terrible idea because I am not that, right? I'm not an editor. I don't work in publishing. I cannot, I read books, but that doesn't, not everybody who reads book is somebody you should take their word for." But it happened repeatedly, and enough that I decided that that would be a space that I would try and build out for myself. And so, because I was on the cruise ships and because these manuscripts wound up in my lap, I thought, okay, I can build a business that I wasn't thinking about building. And so, it's actually being on the cruise ships that allowed me to create a sustainable business that I can now do anywhere. And I spend several months a year doing it on a cruise ship.
Yeah, well, thank God for Wi-Fi.
Oh,
Just
yeah. Oh, you have no idea.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned like this notion of like a book coach. So like my understanding is that different than maybe just a traditional like editor or maybe like an instructor. Like by giving feedback, are you like page by page, like giving them like feedback, or is it more just general like thoughts? Like I'm kind of curious, just like what a client might receive
Yeah.
from like these sessions, I guess.
Yeah, so I mean, originally I thought like I would be an editor, and then I, took one, half a minute thinking about the idea of like having to go in and edit somebody's bibliography, and like
Mhm.
thought this was a terrible idea because that was awful when I had to do it for myself. You literally couldn't pay me to do it, right? And um, basically, I kind of bridged out from what people were asking for, which was just, can you review it? Can you think about how this works? And so the coaching, being a book coach, the way I define it,
Mhm.
quite simply is I am in the editing space, right? There's a developmental editor, substantive editor. So basically somebody who takes a 30,000 foot view at the manuscript, considers the market, considers readership, publishing, all of that stuff. I do that on a long-term basis with writers. So basically, if they have a book or they have a book concept, what I do as a coach is I help them approach the right market and the right readership in order to write the best book for that or to pitch the best publisher for that. And so building out on both sides of that. But that's how it's different, right? If you need line editing or copy editing, like there are people for that, and there are people that really get really happy with like Chicago Manual of Style, and man, I those thank God for those people because I'm not one of them.
Well, and that kind of makes more sense. Like you're kind of leading them to that certain point, and maybe that gives them more confidence, like to have another pair of eyes and maybe another like perspective, because it definitely does seem like they're just also trying to get someone else to get their eyes on it. So I can definitely see how that can be beneficial.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so when it comes to like most career like pivots, you sometimes like they're pretty kind of like quite a big shift or like changes people didn't expect. So when it comes to your career pivot, I'm assuming there's a lot that overlaps that translates pretty well since you're doing a lot of writing, a lot of reviewing. Is there anything like that the work that you're doing now that you weren't prepared for from academia? Are there any skills that you had to learn while doing this?
Sure. I mean, learning about other publishing industries beyond academia was a big shift. But I mean, my academic training is really the backbone of my business. When I first started out, as you know, as your listeners and your audience knows, like having a PhD, having an advanced degree, people sometimes think more of it than you even think of it yourself. So building the business and saying I had a PhD was a way to get early clients, but I was also really targeting academic writers, but particularly academic writers who wanted to figure out how to publish non-academic books. So for me, it was like I can take this skill set that I have and this language of academia that I speak and I'm comfortable with and I live in, but because I'm out of it now, right? Like I've got one foot out the door, I can also speak different languages. And so kind of learning the differences between academic publications and general trade publications and expectations and where are they similar and where are they different and how can, as academics, how can we take this thing that we're really excited about and write about it for more than like the three people that would read it if it came out from our niche university press, you know?
Yeah, and then looking back, like, do you have any regret at all for switching, or do you feel pretty content in like the kind of lifestyle you have right now?
I think I am finally in a space where I'm feeling comfortable and settled. I mean, I think it will be a long time still. I mean,
Mhm.
I've been out of academia for a decade at this point, which is crazy. But I hate to say that if somebody knocked on my door tomorrow and said, we can give you a job teaching and that, wherever, I, I, it would be lying to say I wouldn't jump at it. Like that's still in the back of my mind as like that still would have been awesome. And I do miss that, but I'm much more comfortable realizing that that was never reality. And that what I've built now with the ability to do the things that matter, to do the research I love, to talk with people who are really, really excited to talk about the topics I like, to travel all over and do it, and to read great books. I mean, in some ways, I've kind of built this hodgepodge, like alternate universe of academia that's just way less stress and way more fun.
And I'm assuming like the people like clients you work with, do they ever like mention about going back to academia? Like these like professors you're and clients you're talking to, does that ever come up?
What I think it's so who me going back to academia?
Yeah, like if you're talking to a client who's maybe they're like a professor and they're like, "Oh, why aren't you working in academia or XYZ?" I'm just kind of curious if there's like an organic way of how that might come about, like talking about like academia and maybe going
Um,
back.
It's interesting. It's a weird space to talk about. I am always, I would say when I started out doing this, I was really afraid to talk about academia because I had that sense of like, I didn't make it and these, academics are going to call me out. Like if somebody stops and thinks about the fact that I'm not actually tenured myself, that my clients will somehow lose respect for me. Like there was a real sense of I don't want them to think I'm a failure because I'm not a professor. And so I didn't really do a lot of talking about it, but it's become much more comfortable and much more organic. And what I think is interesting is we wind up often in a lot of conversations about like the pros and cons. Like I'm pleasantly surprised by how much more, for lack of a better word, forgiving my clients are of the fact that I am not in academia and more understanding than I thought they'd be. And we kind of talk about, you know, why what they've got going on is good and why what I've got going on is good and how it's nice that there are alternatives. I mean, I'm always surprised by how frequently the conversations are, there are good things out there that still bridge these worlds.
Hmm. Yeah, that's great to know, and I'm sure you're much happier. It seems like from our conversation, like you seem to be more at peace with that. And I know some folks I've talked to, it seems like they either don't ever want to go back, or there's like something that's kind of wants to bring them back. But that's good to know that you find that lifestyle that you like and enjoy. And so I have some like two final questions. They're kind of related, but firstly, like let's say if you're an academic right now and you want to do lectures on a cruise ship, how would you go about that? And secondly, if for those feeling like unstuck, well, sorry, for those feeling not really sure what to do next, and don't really have a clear path forward, like what would you suggest? So they're kind of yeah, two separate
Yeah.
questions.
I mean, so the lecturing thing is a fun gig. It really it is a fun just fun. I don't know. I'm headed off Monday again. Like
Yeah.
um it's really easy to get into, to be perfectly honest with you. Most of your more like, you know, uh, I don't know what we want to call them, like upper tier cruise lines have lecturers on board, and the pressure is really low and the rewards are really high. There isn't really payment involved more than the fact that you get someone to pay for your travel. So think of it kind of like a grant. It's how I like
Mhm.
to look at it. Um, but it's you can reach out to most lines and particularly ones that rank well for enrichment programming. And there's opportunities to do that for 1 week or 2 weeks or 1 month or 2 months or however long. And I have, like I said, an increasing number of colleagues on board who are closer to my age, and a couple that are even younger, which is awesome. There need to be more women doing this, more young people doing it, more
Mhm.
scholars of color doing it. Like they really should. Try it out. And in terms of if you're stuck and not sure what's next, um, maybe this is really bad advice, because my experience was like trying to force myself into a space because there's that sense of like panic and paycheck and reality.
Yeah.
Um, the best advice I have is remembering that most people outside of academia really respect your degree more than you do when you are at your low points because you are not following that path into academia that you thought you would. That sense
Yeah.
of like, I failed, that's internal, and that can be projected on you from colleagues. Um, it's important to remember that outside of academia, like your PhD is amazing and like use it
Mhm.
and lean into it and embrace it and I mean that in the most like sincere way, but also in a marketing way. Like
Yeah.
I stick PhD on the end of my business name because it looks fancy because it is fancy,
Mhm.
you know? And as academics, I think we were very quick to undersell it.
Yeah. And I think it also like depends on the space. Like I think especially like consulting, dealing kind of with books and like reviewing, like I can definitely see that as a plus. Like I personally don't always use it. I mean on LinkedIn, I do, but I work in like marketing, so I feel like certain spaces are a little different. But I do agree though, like if you're gonna use it, like you want to use it well and like market it as a way to kind of build trust with people. So I definitely can see that like
Yeah,
being
I think
a very big plus.
as an entrepreneur, when you're trying to like start from scratch, if you're pivoting out of academia into something that's entrepreneurial, it's something that says, if nothing else, hey, I can commit and I can succeed, right?
Mhm.
That's fundamentally what it looks like. If you're worried like I don't have a huge portfolio of whatever, or I don't have, a business degree or whatever. It's the
Mhm.
PhD says, but I can commit and I'm really, really good at things when I do. And so it's a credential, even if it doesn't wind up relating to what you wind up doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Is there anything else like we haven't talked about that you'd like to chime in at the end of our talk? I just want to leave the floor open for anything else.
Yeah, no, I mean, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. To your earlier question, I would say even like 2 years ago, I would be less comfortable talking about this. I would say that, the pivot out of academia is a process.
I
I
agree.
don't know if I've ever met anybody who was like, yeah, and I was okay and I moved on and now life is great. Like, no, we're all we're all still in mourning, I think, in some way, shape, or form. So creating spaces where it's safe to talk about in a way that is optimistic is wonderful, and I appreciate you for doing this.
Yeah, no problem. And thanks again for speaking with me. I'm sure people will be very interested in learning about your journey, especially like from like about what it means to like work on a cruise ship, to do kind of that type of lecturing. Because, and is there any like a website maybe people can look at, or like how do they go about searching that? And also, is there anything you'd like to like a link or a page for your business? I'm happy to include that in the description as well.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, my business, my info is the Write Malloy,
Mhm.
WRITE.com, because no one told me when I started my business you shouldn't have a pun as your business name, but it works. And then I'm on LinkedIn all over the place. That's the easiest way, and I'm happy to answer anybody's questions about that kind of pivot and that kind of work. In terms of cruise ships, there's lots of ways in for lots of different cruise ships. I would simply say pick one and pursue that line, or you know, I don't have more than that. There's lots of them out there.
Well, and I think you mentioned earlier about like enrichment programs. Like that's
Yeah.
definitely like a keyword to definitely search up. So that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, you can
Um,
go to like the cruise ship like rankings, I think every year. I think it might be like Travel and Leisure or Condé Nast, and they rank cruise ships based on enrichment programming. And the ones that are in the top of that, they all have good enrichment programs, and you can usually reach out to their enrichment team.
yeah, that's great advice actually. All right. So again, thank you. Have a good one.
Thanks.